Hello, hello, hello. Let me just double check to make sure. Yes, my microphone is working. So happy Friday, everybody. I'm really excited. Um, we're celebrating my daughter's birthday this weekend. She'll be 3 years old, and getting pregnant with her was actually one of the things that initiated my entrepreneur journey. So it's just, it's her birthday rolling around is always very monumentous for me, or monumental. So if you are watching live, please, hashtag live or emojis. Emojis are good. I love those things. And then, of course, the greeting of the day, something like that. Mm. And I hope that you are having a wonderful Friday, that you are on the cusp of a relaxing and well deserved weekend. Hey, Krissa, thanks for being here. I think you're going to enjoy today's topic. I feel like you enjoy all the topics, though, but this is good. So today we are just going to spend, about 10 minutes or so talking about the difference between a webinar and a workshop. And I want to give you kind of some backstory on how this topic came up. Just, just this week, just this week, I was in a Facebook group and they were talking about this workshop that they were going to do. And I was like, oh, I like all the content in here. This is good. I'm going to go ahead and be here for the workshop. Now, my first clue should have been that the workshop was a Facebook live stream. That was my first clue. You can't really do a workshop as a live stream. You can't, at least not as I understand these different words. And so actually today we are going to go ahead and break out these different words and what they mean. But needless to say, as I mentioned in the description, if you misuse these labels, whether unintentionally or intentionally, you could cause attendee remorse, buyer's remorse, because they won't feel like the time was well spent. So first things first, webinars. What is a webinar? So a webinar is meant to be, we use it as a marketing tool, but it's meant to be an educational tool to educate our audience on a particular topic. Now, it's very, me speaking to you focused. You typically have one presenter, or you have multiple presenters switching out, and there's often slides or something like that, and it's meant to be, again, very me to you. It's a very one-sided communication mechanism. So I guess you can't really call it communication, but I guess there's two sides to communication. There's the sending and there's the receiving, but it's a very one-way type of communication tool that we do use for marketing. And over the last several years, the efficacy of it has been proven in terms of a lead generation tool. And I'm using lead generation very intentionally here. If you didn't catch live stream from yesterday, definitely want to do that. It's effective as a lead generation tool, but not nearly as effective as a relationship generation tool. And that was the topic for yesterday's live stream. So this is webinar. This is what a webinar is. And I don't think I've ever actually done a webinar. Have I ever actually? Nope. I've never done a webinar. I actually did something I called last week. I called it a webinar, not last week, but I called it a webinar last year around this time, but it was actually a workshop. I had it was a Zoom, and everybody was on the same level, and people were asking questions and stuff like that. So it was a Zoom. It wasn't quite a workshop, but it was definitely not a webinar in that we had two-way communication. Other people could talk, and ask questions and interact, and everybody could see each other's faces and things like that. So webinars are often meant as training types of opportunities or educational opportunities. Next up are the master classes. Everybody and their mom is having a master class. The key here, though, is that you should at least feel as if you are a master, I think, to use this. Or, if you wouldn't be the person to call yourself a master, I would say that the people around you, or at least from the perspective of your audience, you have to understand how you're perceived by your audience. You would be considered a master. So like where I would say, I wouldn't necessarily say, oh yes, I'm a master. I can also understand that for my clients and for my audience, they would consider me an expert. So would I run a master class on a topic? Yes. Now, master classes are, again, this is more of a training opportunity. still very much more one-way type of communication. And then depending on the infrastructure that's used to host the master class, it definitely, again, reinforces kind of that me to you type of communication versus a two-way street. But a master class is meant to be like the impression. When you hear the word master class, you're like, ooh, we're going to get real deep on a topic. This is going to be real good, valuable content. Whereas a webinar might be considered more general, still could be training and education, but it would probably be a more general skim of a topic, unless, you do a webinar that probably also could have been called a master class. But with a master class, we're expecting a certain depth of knowledge. You know what I mean? And we're expecting a certain demonstration of skill or expertise here. So if you call it a master class, just make sure that for your target audience, it would in fact be a deep dive type of master class. And we expect webinars to be like 60 to 90 minutes, unless they're super stuffing them with testimonials and things like that. And then they just kind of ruin the webinar. But a masterclass could certainly run a bit longer because it's training and people are expecting to go deep on a topic. Moving into workshops, my fave. Workshops tend to be, they give the impression when we're thinking workshop, we're thinking that we're going to do something, right? So the word workshop started out like we think of somebody's like carpentry workshop, right? Where they go and create stuff, they work on things. So in the case of business, what we're typically expecting is that we will have something that we work on, even in a conceptual way, which is why workshops often come with worksheets. Right. And we have a particular problem that the person hosting the workshop is looking to guide people through. Perfect example, my why workshop from last week. I took 9 entrepreneurs. We did have a worksheet that they were able to work through. I took 9 entrepreneurs and we dived into the 4 different layers of their why. And we went deep and there was a lot of back and forth. There was feedback. There was chat in the chat box, but there was a lot of feedback here. And it was incredibly intimate. I would not have been able to do that with a large number of people. So if I wanted to do the why as a master class or as a webinar, I would have set it up so there was more talking on my end and no talking or less talking from the audience, at least in terms of what they could do outside of the chat box. So that's something to keep in mind. The why workshop was 3 hours long. If I was doing a why webinar or a presentation on the why, which I will be doing actually tomorrow for someone, and that's supposed to be 30 to 45 minutes, that's going to be more one way. I'm going to have more slides and I'm going to set it up so I am communicating with them. And then, of course, they will have an opportunity to ask questions, but it's a very me to you. Let's see. I have a comment here. Adding to the many reasons that words and wording matter so much. Yes, yes, and yes. Yes, the words matter. They help set expectations. And so we have to, Krista says that this explanation is helpful. I am so glad to hear it. So that is probably like the big distinction there, right? So at the beginning of this, I mentioned, hey, I attended something called a workshop earlier this week. And in fact, it would have been better as a webinar, or they should have called it a webinar because that's in fact what it was. A workshop told me that I was going to be able to work on something. I was going to be able to walk away with an approach or technique. And in fact, this was an interest generating or lead generating webinar in the form of a Facebook live stream, which, to be honest, like I get it, like it works, but that I didn't appreciate that because I showed up with a certain expectation. And then finally, what I want to go into are retreats, because this is something that's becoming very popular as well. Good tea. So retreats, this is something that more people were doing, like virtual retreats where, some in-person retreats are coming back because we're able to keep the groups small and things like that. But a retreat is also something that when we hear retreat, we're thinking intimate, we're thinking deep, we're thinking transformational. And so a retreat can't be something that's got hundreds of people. It can't, because if it's got hundreds of people, then it's a summit. It's a virtual conference or an in-person conference. It's not a retreat at that point. Now, I'm not saying that you couldn't have. So, of course, my brain is like, but what if they did it this way? So I'll share that with you. I don't know. Maybe somebody will get some use out of this. But if somebody was doing a retreat and hundreds of people, or even let's say 50 people, 100 people were participating, the way I could see this working is if you grouped people into groups of 5 or 10, each with their own lead facilitator, and they went through the retreat agenda together as a individualized group, and then perhaps they came together for some bigger things, maybe some networking things, so they could cross-pollinate the different groups. But if you were doing a large scale retreat, I think you would have to group everyone together to maintain that intimate feel, as well as allowing them to really go deep, because that's what we expect when we hear the word retreat. We're thinking we're going deep, we're working hard, this is going to be transformational, I might cry. Like, that's really what we're looking for, right? So when we use these different words, we have to be incredibly intentional. Let's see. Okay, I got another comment. I think that can be a sign as well if a business knows the why, depending on how they use a webinar, workshop, etc. So yes, and this tied back into what I said yesterday. I did a workshop because I realized my values were for relationships. My values wanted intimacy and the opportunity to either create a new relationship or go deeper and nurture a relationship between myself and the attendees, right? So a webinar was not going to do that. A webinar was not going to do that. And so that's why I opted for the workshop in the truest sense of the word as I could. Now, if I had done it in person as an actual workshop, I would have missed out. Like, we had somebody from India who participated in the workshop. I would have missed out on that. And we had people all over the United States who participated in the virtual workshop. So I would have missed out on that. So it's just important to consider that when we look at these different words, right? So I talked about webinars, I talked about master classes, workshops, and retreats. The line for me is between masterclass and workshop. Webinar, I expect more general type of information. Now, it could be more specific, but it's just the way that you set it up. But I think a lot of webinars, if they do go really deep on a particular topic, they could also be master classes. So with a master class, I expect deep information, but still very much one-way type of communication from me to the people who are attending. But then when we get into things like workshops and retreats, I'm not saying that the host or organizer or coordinator of that workshop or retreat isn't still doing a lot of communicating on their end in terms of guiding people through the experience, but I also expect to receive a lot from my audience, from my participants, because they're no longer an audience, they're participants. So I expect to receive a lot as well. And I expect crosstalk between people and an opportunity for other folks to give feedback and things like that. So when you have a workshop and a retreat, I also draw the line between webinar and masterclass. I expect a lot more intimacy at the workshop and retreat level. So again, just be sure that you're using these words properly, so that way you can set the right expectation and be clear about what it is that you're offering, so people don't get buyer's remorse. Okay, so I'm at 13 minutes, so I'm 3 minutes over. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up here. Be sure again to check out the Defiant Business podcast this week. We had Christina Baker from the organization, the social justice organization Dream Corps, on the podcast. She talked about her journey, and next week she's going to be talking to us about digital marketing and digital activism from their perspective at Dream Corps. And I'm very excited about what's coming up next. Again, if you are interested in being part of the beta group cohort, it's going to be 5 seats for the Build a Supernova brand program starting on May 10th. Please do let me know. It's at least worth the conversation, even if you think maybe you can't do it right now. Let's just see if you're even a good fit. So thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And I will talk to you guys on Monday for the Marketing Monday live stream. Bye.